Dayton County Humane Society Wildlife Center, which is a cool place. We actually have a board member that volunteers there too, and we really appreciate the work you do. But anyway, we're going to have a little bit on, if you can read at rehabilitation, and from this I'm going to turn it over to Paige. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the welcome. Well, my name is Paige Pederson. I'm the Wildlife Operations Supervisor at the Dayton County Humane Society Wildlife Center. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, so it is a beautiful drive here. I love coming over to Horicon.
It's not loud enough. Yeah,
I'm going to turn it up, so.
I'm worried.
We'll see. I'll keep talking so I can practice with the sound. Well, I am really excited to talk about bats. I've been in the field of wildlife rehabilitation for over 10 years, and I was privileged to help create and grow the bat rehabilitation program at my wildlife center. And I've learned a lot over the years. There's always more to learn, and that's one of the best things about this field that I'm privileged to be in. So today I want to talk a little bit about wildlife rehabilitation, the different species and the work that we do at DCHS. We'll talk a little bit more about the bats of Wisconsin and some of their natural history traits and how that affects our rehabilitation process. And some fun facts and some extra resources for you as well too. You're welcome to ask questions, and I definitely will be happy to answer questions at the end as well. So has anyone heard of wildlife rehabilitation before? Awesome. I figured this would be the group. What about, has anyone brought an injured animal to a wildlife rehabilitator? All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. So if you don't know, wildlife rehabilitation, our goal is to provide care for sick, injured, or orphaned wildlife, and to rehabilitate them, repair them, help raise them, and return them back to the wild. We want to return them back to their natural habitat, and we want those individuals to be mentally, behaviorally healthy. We want them to be fit and able to contribute to their population and their gene pool. And so that's what we're doing. At DCHS, we work with such a wide variety that we see there's always something new to learn, there's always something new to consider when we triage our patients and think about what's the best case scenario for them as we move forward. Why is wildlife rehab important? This is something I've spent the last 10 years doing and working with, and there's so many different facets that go into this. And for my coworkers and volunteers and folks who support our work, a lot of people have a different connection of what's some of the more important facets for why wildlife rehabilitation is important. But for a few key points, as wildlife rehabilitators, we're collecting a lot of scientific data, we're contributing to conservation, we're monitoring for environmental changes, we're monitoring for disease changes. We see some of these injured animals, we get some of those first calls. For example, if there is a high West Nile season, we tend to see the crows coming in first, and that's something we can work with our regulatory agencies, our public health agencies to let them know that things are happening. Additionally, a few years ago, has anyone ever heard of avian influenza, high-path avian influenza? Same thing as wildlife rehabilitators, we were on the front lines of seeing wild animals, patients affected by this disease and getting calls about them, recognizing that it was coming to our area in Wisconsin. And we also helped identify that it actually had spilled over into mammals. We had identified it in some fox kits that we were emitting that spring of 2022. And so as rehabilitators, we can help contribute to the scientific pool of knowledge to move conservation forward. We also can see the difference in emissions over the years based on the season. Do we have a late spring and early spring? And how does that affect the population of our birds? How the mammals are reproducing, etc. So bats, I'm going to talk about bats. Big surprise, I know. So the bats are one of those huge ones for us that have to deal with conservation. Many of the species in Wisconsin are a threatened species, so the conservation for each individual animal in that case is really important. So as a wildlife rehabilitator, I get to help in that aspect. Also, it's really, really wonderful to be able to save an animal's life, to be able to make a difference, especially to make a difference when we know many of the causes for admission to us have a human component to them. This is a bird that hit a window, for example, this bluebird, who came in on us this fall. We can help relieve pain and suffering so that an animal is not suffering in the wild. We can help train the next generation. We can talk to folks like you to be able to share with those who have a similar ethic of wildlife. And it's really a community service. I know some of you raised your hands and you brought wildlife animals to a wildlife rehabilitator. It is a partnership. As a wildlife rehabilitator, I could not do the work I do without members of the public like you. So in Wisconsin and throughout the state, or throughout the United States, there are different regulations on how you become a wildlife rehabilitator. In Wisconsin, I hold both a license from the DNR, and I started with a basic license, and to do that I had a rehabilitator that sponsored me. I did so at my center, and from there I've since moved on to hold an advanced wildlife rehabilitation license. And I have a license to work with all sorts of different species. Additionally, we also work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to be regulated as well, because we're working with migratory birds. And what about the bats? So I mentioned earlier, many of the bats are threatened in Wisconsin or endangered in the United States. We also work with the DNR closely and the National Heritage Conservation folks to hold appropriate permits to work with those threatened species. And also to consider some extra biosecurity risks that these species have. So at DCHS, I tried to put some nice photos in that weren't just bats, so you get to see all the wide variety of species I get to work with. But last year, 2023, we saw just over 2,000 patients coming in. This year, it's gone gangbusters. We have admitted over 2,900 patients so far this year, and those include mammals, waterfowl, shorebirds, raptors. Yes?
This is not working.
Oh!
Yeah, it's working.
It's working.
It's not carrying it
Not
back.
there?
Don't turn them both on.
Because the sound doesn't carry it.
I need, before you turn that on, I need to turn that down, because that's on higher volume.
Technical thing. Just hit that button really many times.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, hi folks. I sound louder to me.
You are louder.
Awesome. Thank you for saying something. So at DCHS, this year we've seen an abundance of admissions coming in. And it is seasonal every year. This year, one of the drivers of that is we're seeing a lot more reptiles and amphibians coming in. So our numbers of turtles are higher. So I don't have our top species for this year, but last year, in 2023, our big brown bats did make the list. So in the rehabilitation process, there's 4 steps. The first one is admission and triage, and this starts before an animal even walks in the door. We want to talk with a member of the public and consider what we know about the natural history of an animal, what season it is right now, to know, is this animal truly in need of help, or is it displaying a natural behavior? For an example of bats, is it the dead of winter and this is a species that should have migrated south, and they do need some intervention and some care. The photo here, anyone want to take a guess on the bat species? It's a big brown bat. Really descriptive names we have. So this is a big brown bat who's undergoing kind of our second assessment. In this, we're assessing and then we're moving into treatment. So this bat is anesthetized. One of our certified veterinary technicians has sedated them so that we can get some really nice symmetrical radiographs or x-rays to see what's going on. This bat in particular, it's hard to see, but he has a little bit of a swollen leg. So this next stage of rehabilitation, we're treating the animal. This might be, we are continuing with our diagnostics. We're evaluating how a wound heals. We're providing wound care. We provide pain medications or antibiotics if it's appropriate. Or if it's a young patient, we raise in the summer season lots of young animals, lots of orphans, whether that be little ducklings or whether this year we did get to work with several young bats. We want to make sure that they are raised appropriately and get to weaning age, and they would be independent from their parents before they then move on to the next stage. So our third stage in care for patients that come in is the reconditioning stage. So we are going to move these patients as much as we can outside. We have species-specific enclosures for every different type of animal. So if you're a turtle, we're going to put you into a swim tub. If you're a duck and you're a dabbler, you can have access to land and you have access to water. If you're a bird of prey, we want to make sure you have enough space to fly. Same thing for bats. We will do some flight testing in our outdoor enclosures, make sure that they look appropriate. And then the last stage, and the happiest one for many of us and for our volunteers and interns, is making the decision to release an animal and taking them back out into the wild. We can always consider the individual species, the age of that species, where it came from, what season it is right now, when we make decisions about what time of day they might be released. I bet you guys could guess. What time of day do you think we release bats? At night. Good job. So I always do want to talk about safety for bats. I absolutely love working with bats. I've worked with hundreds over the years. The one thing I always want to make sure I tell a member of the public, and I do this when I talk to them on the phone, I do it when I talk to them in person, is that please do never handle a bat with your bare hands. Bats can carry rabies. It is a very, very low risk, but it is always there. We want to make sure we do things safely and appropriately when we handle them. So rabies is transmitted through the saliva, so through a bite or mucous membrane exposure, but less than 0.5% of bats in the US actually do have rabies, so the risk is very low. You want to consider, if you find a bat in your home while you're sleeping or with a child or a domestic pet, you do want to consider, you do want to talk to your public health department and kind of read through the CDC guidelines just to make sure you're safe before you handle that. You can also call your local wildlife rehabilitator. Anyone know what the species of bat is? I haven't told you the different species yet. Any bat experts? Mary in the front knows. This is an eastern red bat. So I mentioned a few species now of bats. Does anyone want to take some guesses on how many bat species we have in Wisconsin? 20? 50? Got some good guesses? There are 8. There are 8 different species in Wisconsin. That said, the United States is home to in the 40s different species. And worldwide, there's about 1,400 different species of bats, all with very unique natural history elements and very fun species. In Wisconsin, we have the little bats. They are insectivores. You can go to other places in the world and see the big fruit bats. I would love to work with a fruit bat someday. So we do have 8 different species of bats in Wisconsin. There's the big brown bat, the little brown bat, the tricolor bat, the northern long-eared bat, and then we have our eastern red, our silver-haired, our hoary, and our Eden bat. And I've grouped them into 4 and 4. Does anyone know why we split these 2 apart? In Wisconsin, we can generally categorize these bats into 2 separate groups. On the left, with our big brown bats, these are our cave bats, our crevice dwelling bats. And on the right, these are our tree bats or our foliage-rich bats. And so they have different lifestyles. In Wisconsin, we're privileged to have an equal number of both. The evening bat is one that was found in Wisconsin for the first time just a few years ago in 2016. I haven't had the privilege of seeing one yet, but they've been so far found in southern Wisconsin. The northern long-eared bat with the 2 stars, this is the only bat that is both threatened in the state of Wisconsin and unfortunately threatened on the federal level. So their population has been declining quite a bit. The other cave bats are also threatened in the state of Wisconsin, and I'll talk a little bit more about why as we go on. But here we are. So the most common bat that I work with is up in the corner. It's the big brown bat. Probably about 95% of admissions to the Wildlife Center are big brown bats. I've also seen little brown bats, which are about half to a third of the size in real life. The hoary bats are the largest bat in Wisconsin. And then I also often see eastern red bats or silver-haired bats. I haven't had the privilege yet of seeing an evening bat or a tricolor bat in rehabilitation, although I've seen one in the wild. So our bats in Wisconsin, we split them into 2 groups. We have our cave bats, our crevice dwellers. They hibernate in caves. And the reason we see our big brown bats more commonly in rehabilitation is because they tend to choose human structures much more commonly than the other cave bats. So they'll choose your attic or your cellar. That's this species. That's most often seen around humans. They're also colonial roosters. They are very social species. All of these bat species are extremely smart. They are aerial insectivores in the wild, so they're catching all of their food on the wing. In rehabilitation, we can't replicate that very well. So the bats have to learn how to eat from a dish or learn how to eat by hand. And thankfully, they're pretty smart. I have a couple cute videos coming up. Yeah, so this is an eastern red bat. She is alive, don't worry. This is an alive bat, and they are generally solitary bats. And unlike the cave bats, they tend to stay solitary even when they have young. And the eastern red bats carry their bat pups with them most often. So if you look closely, there are tiny baby bats on her belly, folded underneath and protectively underneath her wings. So a common call for us for an eastern red bat in the summer months, often June, July, August, is to get a call and a photo of something similar to this. And this is an eastern red bat mom with 4 nursing pups who got herself into a bit of trouble and fell down and couldn't get back up. She's carrying a lot of weight. So she just got too tired. There was probably a storm the evening before, got jostled out of a tree and fell. So this had a beautiful success story. We were able to put her back up into a tree and she flew off with her 4 pups at dusk. 4 is the max for an eastern red. They will have 1 to 4. 1 and 2, much more common. But these babies will stay and stay with the parents for several weeks, and as they grow, that's a lot of weight for mom to carry. She's superhuman, super bat. So our bats, all of our bats share a common life trait where they are going to mate in the fall season, but they're going to delay implantation until the spring. So they're going to delay until the weather is appropriate and the bugs, the food source, has come back, whether they are a cave bat or a tree bat. And so you'll see our baby season is June through August. And the red bats like this photo, they carry their young. Some of the others, like a hoary bat, will as well too. And there's some generalizations here. Each of the different species have some really unique characteristics, and they're so fun, so fun. I could probably talk for a couple hours. So one of the things I think is so cool is when I look at bats, I do a physical exam when they come in, and I'm always looking to make sure that they haven't injured their wings. And I wanted to show you a diagram of what they're actually using to fly. So we have our human arm with our bones in it. Our bird wing is very similar, just covered with our feathers. That is a house finch up there. And then this is an eastern red bat infant showing off his fingers for us. But the wings, as they extend out, they're flying around on their fingertips. So their pinky is that big bone there on the bottom, and their thumb is the little one up top. And this is the face of that little red bat that was facing away.
Only a mother loves it. It's pretty.
So in Wisconsin and throughout the United States and the world, but mostly talking about Wisconsin today, there are several big threats to bats. Habitat loss is huge, and how that affects the insect population, pesticides use, and the effect on the population of insects. And then there's also several big diseases. The largest and the most significant for bats recently is called white nose syndrome. And this is a disease that's caused by a fungus. It was first identified in the United States in 2006 over on the East Coast in New York, and has since spread across the US. And this is a fungus that grows naturally in caves in other parts of the world. And here in the United States, our bats have never been exposed to that, and unfortunately they're negatively affected. So this fungus will actually grow on the bat during hibernation, and because they're sleeping, they're not noticing it this as much, and the fungus will take over. When they do notice, they wake up during the winter, and they groom themselves, and they burn too many calories. They wake up too often because they're affected by this fungus bothering them and starting to cause issues, that they end up slowly burning through all their fat resources that they've stored up in the fall to make it all the way through winter, and they end up succumbing to the disease. Because the disease is found in caves, this is the direct reason why the species that are cave bats are threatened in Wisconsin, whereas our tree bats are not. They are not naturally exposed to this fungus in the wild. There's some other concerns as well for bats. Generally, the disturbances during hibernation is a big one, whether that's white nose syndrome causing an effect, or they've chosen an inappropriate hibernation spot, especially in the big browns. This is a common cause for us to see admissions. They've chosen an attic, a cellar, something where the temperature fluctuates too much, and they burn through their resources because they artificially wake up. It gets warmer, they wake up, they burn through those fat stores they have, and they slowly lose their body condition, and then they'll start coming out, looking for food, and find themselves in trouble. Another consideration in the last couple years that we worked really closely with the public health and Wisconsin DNR and the bat biologist is a concern, a zoonotic concern about the COVID pandemic, and that bats are great at harboring viruses, and we don't want to accidentally give COVID-19 to our bat population. So in care, now in rehabilitation, we are very careful that we are always actually remaining masked, not for our sake, but for the bat's sake, so that we don't give COVID to the bat species in our care. So you'll see that in some photos as well too, of people wearing masks. I'm gonna actually go back in. The white nose syndrome, the background photos on this slide, the very dark blue at the back of the screen is a healthy bat wing under a UV light. The inset photo, which is always hard to see, is of a bat that has the fungus on his wings, and it fluoresces an orange color under a UV light. So we check all of the bats that come into care with us with a UV light to check for the presence of this fungus. This was a little brown bat that did have fungus on his wings in the inset photo. So I mentioned earlier, this is our spread of white nose syndrome across the state. And so it started on our East Coast and slowly been moving across. These are the regions in the United States that are tested for it. It is most likely more widespread than it is shown on the map. And certainly because it has reached the West Coast, we know it is now affecting almost the entire United States. The bat populations in Wisconsin and in other states of the cave bats truly have plummeted. Our DNR biologists have been doing a great job doing surveys and monitoring populations of roosts. And I do know that there were some positive notes, they said, from this past year, that some of the roosting sites had a few more bats than they did last year, which is a positive sign. White-nose syndrome officially came to the state of Wisconsin in 2014. It was first found in Grant County, but it is now spread all throughout the state of Wisconsin. So in rehabilitation for bats, we are going to admit them and do a full physical exam. You see we've got all of our lovely biosecurity on, making sure that we don't give the bats COVID, and also we're keeping each bat separate from each other so that we can make sure they don't have a white-nose syndrome fungus, that we don't spread those between as well. So there's a lot of different diseases and concerns that we take into account when working with our bats. So there's one staff member on the left who's doing an exam on a new bat that just came in. A member of the public brought it to us in our lovely shoebox. And we're going to do an exam and then move them over to a cage, such as this on the right-hand side. Well, we'll monitor their weight, monitor their fluid intake, start feeding them. In care, we feed a lot of mealworms. I bet you know what those are. Something's going on. Well, that's okay. Just make sure. Once a patient has recuperated from what's injury, many of the bats that come in are emaciated because they've been disturbed during hibernation and are now burned through the resources. So they just need some care and some time and lots of feeding. One of the last stages we'll do is a flight condition. We're going to evaluate their flight, make sure everything is appropriate, they have a good body condition, they have good fat stores, they're ready for release at whatever the appropriate time of year is. And so we'll do something like flight testing. So you can see we use this lovely pop-up tent. If you ever come to see me at DCHS in the future, or you ever come to a presentation, we just built a 120-foot flight pen with solar panels for our birds of prey. The trick question is going to be that the very first patient that ever got to use it was an eastern red bat, and not a bald eagle. Bear with me while I get some videos going. So I have a few videos just of standard of care while we're working through. So this is an eastern red bat, and this is an infant. So think of those pups on the mom that was down. This is a different baby. But we are doing a grooming procedure to make sure that the skin and the fur condition remains in good shape, just like their parent would.
And what are you using for the brush?
That's a mascara wand. We like to reuse. So this is a video of an adult big brown bat in one of our cages doing one of the most exciting things that can ever happen in captivity. So this is a bat that normally self-feeds, but they are feeding on the wing. So this is a bat that has figured out how to eat mealworms out of a dish. And that means as a rehabilitator, I don't need to handle that bat as often, which is really improves the welfare of the bat, not having to deal with me. And getting to enjoy their time in captivity just by gouging out on some mealworms while they work on improving their body condition before release. So So these bats you'll often notice if you see them in the wild, you see them in captivity, they're going to be roosting upside down. They will most often or naturally hang from their back feet, and they'll use their thumbs and their wings to walk forward and climb as well.
Is this bat relying on its sense of smell because it can't see? How does it know where the worms are?
Yeah, that's a great question. They can, bats will echolocate for their food. They do that in captivity. We see them opening their mouths and scanning. They also actually do have very good eyesight. They do have good eyesight and can see what's happening around them, even though it's dark. They can see better than me, probably. I think their sense of smell is probably there as well. I don't know how much it's been researched. That's one I've never considered. I'm gonna look it up after this. Yeah.
The worms are terrestrial. How do these feed on the wing? How would they get used to feeding on the food?
Yes, that's a great question. We teach them.
Paige, could you repeat the question,
Yeah.
please?
Yes. So the question was, these are mealworms that are terrestrial. How do these bats learn how to eat them? What happens when they're released? Do they know how to feed on the wing as well? Let me start this next video. Here we go. So this is a big brown bat that we have admitted into care, and this is probably day 1, day 2. We're actually teaching it how to eat mealworms out of a dish. So we will hand feed each bat. There's tweezers here in the corner of the video. We'll use that to actually individually offer a mealworm to a bat. At the end of the video, you'll also see us offer some water by syringe. So we start by hand feeding the bat. From there, we'll move to this next step where we're just putting the bowl in front of their face. They figured out that a mealworm tastes good, and they don't mind it, and they will very quickly pick it up. It's amazing to me how smart our species of bats are in Wisconsin. So this is an adult big brown bat, and you can say by their name, they're not actually that big.
And if there was sound, they'd be making little. They like them. They like
It's a
them.
very satisfying sound with a little chew sound. So here at the end, we're just offering a little bit of extra water. In the wild, bats are grooming moisture off themselves for hydration. They're getting some of the insects that they're eating. They will actually skim on the water sometimes and drink that way as well. But we'll offer water hand-fed while we're feeding them, and then also dishes of water, which they do come down and drink in captivity. So I wanted to share one particular case. This is a big brown bat. This is from back in 2018, but I had some of the best photos. So in May of 2018, we have this photo up here. This is a bat that came in with a wing injury. So this is their Rehabilitation is the skin of their wing membrane, and had a tear. And we don't know what caused this. Could have gotten stuck on things like a shutter, or squeezed into something too tight, something sharp caught the wing, and had an injury. And this bat was found down. He could not fly. This tear was too large. So we offered supportive care, some antibiotics, some pain medication, some treatments, and we had to wait and watch. Bats have a great propensity for healing these wing membranes. There's a lot of vasculature throughout these wings, and they can heal. So the photo on the left then, my left, you're right, from July of 2018, you can start to see around the edges of that wing tear, that lighter colored tissue, that scar tissue, that's healthy healing tissue. You notice that hole is already contracting down.
Does that wing have a blood supply?
It does, yes, yep. There's a lot of blood vessels that run through there. And so in August, you can see already much smaller, half the size. I'll go back to the previous one. We started here in May, and here we are in August. And you can see how quickly that hole has healed itself. So this bat, it took a lot of time, several months in captivity, but this is a bat who learned how to self-feed, and so we could be very hands-off, limit their stress in captivity, And then we ended up releasing in September. Any idea why we would have released when he still had a little hole? Any guesses? The time of the year. You guys got it. So two things. This was a female bat, and in the fall, our bats are mating. They're mating so that they're ready to reproduce the next spring. And they're also clumping themselves up and getting ready to go into hibernation. So this one was a big brown bat, so they were ready to go into hibernation here in Wisconsin. Another species might be getting ready to migrate further south. And so this bat was flight tested and was flying beautifully even with this small hole. So it was better to get her back out into the wild. That's me making noise this time. So what happens after a patient leaves our doors? We don't always know. Post-release monitoring in wildlife rehabilitation is a field that is still growing. We can do some post-release monitoring with birds, with federal bird banding. And in bats, we have recently been working closely with our Wisconsin DNR biologists to do some banding of bats and to try and see what happens when we release them. We're also working more closely with them to try and do some winter releases last year and this year. And normally for a hibernating bat, we can't release this bat into outside. They're hibernating, there's no food source, we don't want them to starve. But we're working with the DNR to find actual hibernation spots that we can put these bats that are healthy right back into a cave system instead of being released outside, and monitoring how they're doing from there. So I'm excited to say I think we'll be able to do some more of that this year and hopefully have some good results to know that those bats were successful. So there's several different ways that you and I can help bats. There's several different citizen science programs. You can monitor a roost. If you have a bat house at your home or you know of one, you can contribute actual bat counts multiple times a year to help monitor the population. You can also do some acoustic monitoring. There's some great resources from the DNR and the Wisconsin Bat Program. You can build a bat house. We also, it's a great idea is just to avoid disturbing the bats. So if you have a bat house, we don't want to disturb them in the summer months when they actively have their young. Or if you know that they are hibernating in your cellar or your attic, try to leave them be so that they don't artificially wake up and burn through their resources. You can also come volunteer with me or your other local wildlife rehabilitator, or support your local rehabilitator. And also, I think you should just tell people that bats are really cool. They're wonderful for our environment, and we really need them to stick around. I did some more research. I've been planning to build a bat house at my own house, so I was doing some more research for this presentation, and this was the biggest question. I had always wondered where the actual bat house goes, and they really like the sun. We want it to be in the sun, so I gave you that blurb. I have some resources at the end as well. But this photo is an example of the bat house that we use in captivity, not the bat house in the wild. So this is an example of our bat room at the moment. And that's what I have for you on bats. I really appreciate it. Happy to take questions.
So when you release, do you try to release them in like the area or location they were found?
Yes, absolutely. So the question is, what happens, how do we choose where we release the bat? Yes, it is very specific. Depending on the species and the individual, we always make sure we're at the very least within about 1 or 2 miles. It's really how close we try and get. Bats have a pretty wide territory, but depending on the time of year, they have favorites. So we don't want to move them far away from a territory that they're not recognizing. Additionally, we don't want to artificially spread disease. When considering white nose syndrome, we for sure want to stay within the county, so we're not moving a bat between different counties where there might not be a cave system that has this fungus. That was a concern several years ago. At this point in time, white nose syndrome and the fungus is spread throughout the United States, so that's less of a concern.
How many caves will they visit Wisconsin?
Hundreds. Yeah, there are hundreds. I know, off the cuff, this is an estimate, but I'm almost positive our DNR bat biologists monitor close to like 70 known caves and roost sites to monitor the populations, and those are ones that they're monitoring for sure. There's certainly more throughout the US, or throughout Wisconsin.
I heard the term a colony of bats. What is the definition of a colony?
So a colony of bats is a group that's roosting together. You can, in the summer season, our cave bats, the females will form maternal colonies. They'll use something like a bat box, a house. They might still use caves to raise their young together. In the winter, cave bats, generally, at least the big brown bats, are generally very social. So they will group up with 1, 2, 10, 100, 1,000 other bats to actually sleep and roost and hibernate together.
How do we maintain genetic diversity? What's their mating pattern or system?
What's the mating pattern and how do they maintain their genetic diversity was the question. So bats, they will mate during the fall. They swarm up. All the different species in Wisconsin will mate during the fall. For the foliage bats, most of the time they're solitary the rest of the year, and males and females really only come together in that fall season or in the summer when a mom has pups. Otherwise, they're very solitary. So there's certainly a lot of physical movement as they're moving through, and they migrate in the fall. So I think they're naturally mixing with different individuals for genetics. Cave bats, similar things. They are known to have more than one hibernacula or winter roost site. They often have 2 or 3. And so I suspect that they move in the fall, they move through different ones, and that does help with the genetic diversity. That said, I think it's a great area for research more. And I would love also to know more.
Earlier you mentioned how this year it seems the populations are doing pretty well, which I've noticed a lot more bats for sure this year. Have you seen less white nose syndrome? Like maybe is that kind of a trend, or is it potentially here just being okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, as the bat population seems to be getting a little bit better, are we still seeing white nose syndrome? Yes and no. So I think it is a very positive that we've got some reports that some of these known bat roost sites have a higher population than they did a couple of years ago. And no, we're not seeing as many bats come into rehabilitation with evidence of white nose syndrome. But I do think the population is actually still quite low, and so many bats die that there's not as many being infected, new infections coming to us. So positives, but caution.
You said bats can see.
Bats can see. They have very good eyesight. Yep.
I must have missed something in science class.
No, I know. That's a big misnomer.
I know they eat a lot of bugs, but I understand they're also important pollinators. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Wisconsin, the bats are, for a human positive, they are eating so many of the insects and really helping reduce burden on crops, things like that. In other areas of the US and the world, bats feed on different plants and help actually pollinate different species. And so there's many different, it deals with many different species of bats, excuse me. So some will be fruit pollinators, things like tequila, the agave, needs bats to help pollinate them. And there's been a lot of research into the benefits. And certainly I think in the United States, they can put a number into the billions of the positive benefits of bats pollinating and bats eating insects for agriculture.
Do each species of bat have a different communication system and operating at different frequencies?
Yes, yeah. So bats do have different frequencies and different signatures to the noise that they make in their echolocation. So you can, it's not something I'm very familiar with. I haven't had the opportunity to do it in the wild, but one of the citizen science projects you can do with the DNR is actually record acoustic monitoring and actually identify the different species you have flying around based on the vocalizations and the echolocation that they are doing. They are all unique.
Is there an app for that?
I don't know, there probably is an app for that. There is a website for that.
There's a website.
So if you're interested in like the acoustic monitoring or the just roost monitoring a roost number, the Wisconsin Bat Program is a great one. The DNR Bat Resources will actually also take you to the Wisconsin Bat Program. And then Bat Conservation International, that's a large organization worldwide, have some wonderful resources as well. But if you're interested in building bat houses and doing any of that monitoring, these are some fabulous sites. They have some nice videos on how to make bat houses and how to do roost counts. It's really, really nicely laid out.
If you buy a build your own bat house, in the worst situation where you put
Where do you put the bat house? Is that what you said?
where?
So for the bats, for bat houses, we're talking about a singular or maybe two back to back or a few in a row. You can build bat houses on a pole up high. You want them to be at least 8 feet off the ground. I think between 8 and 20 is nice. You want to pick a spot that's gets lots of sun so that there's different temperature gradients, and you want to pick someplace out of the wind. Usually, if there's a water source within a half mile, that's a more popular reason to draw bats. There's no good bat attractant, but if you build it, they might come. And so elevating someplace not windy, someplace with a water source nearby, avoid trees, actually putting bat houses on trees that can allow predators to come to the bat houses and climb up and reach in there, so that the bats will usually start to avoid those. You can also put a bat house on the face of a building, on the face of a house. Those work as well too.
What are the
Oh,
common,
but they're black inside.
Can you say that again?
what are their common predators?
Oh, what are the common predators? So for bats in Wisconsin, they will see predation by raptors, by some owls. Certainly things like raccoons will go forward and try and steal some bats. And then it depends on the age. You will have some different mammal species that will sneak in and try and pull out. The biggest one is raccoons. Sometimes you'll get things like weasels going for them. But the birds of prey is the common one. Owls is a common one. Unfortunately, cats.
Cats, I was just gonna say.
So if you don't put it on a tree, side of the house, what would you mount it on to get it that 8 to 20 feet?
Think like a flagpole. So you can mount a bat house like up on a flagpole.
Aren't you gonna have a lot of guano down there?
Yes.
So it's not a case
Keep that in
of
mind.
kids to play and.
Keep that in mind.
Yes, you can do, they will have bat guano underneath, so it's something that you can routinely clean off. They do also make catchers a little bit higher. And you can also install like bat pup catchers to help catch babies that have fallen underneath. We've helped advise folks to install some for roosts that tend to have a few that just kept falling out. But it is something that, yes, there will be bat guano directly underneath your bat house, so something to consider cleaning. Generally, maintenance for bat houses is very minimal. I think they recommend like once a year in spring or late fall, you clean those out. Or check to make sure you don't have things like wasps in them, but most of the time, bats themselves and actually inside of that house stay very clean because they drop everything out.
Thank you.